Well, Kennedy would often launch the shot from like basically the top of the circle. That was his big problem is he never saw a bad shot that he wouldn't take.
Oh, sure. Like, I don't want either of them shooting, but I mean, in terms of like being part of the cycle or like maintaining possession or like forechecking, I like Nieto a bit more. I never liked the Kennedy assignment. It just, no, he was bad for us. Oh, are you looking at the stats for this game?
Yeah, I have. I was looking at the heat map more than anything.
How's the shift time?
Oh, I hadn't looked at that. I mean,
Anyone over 5?
let's see. No. Yes. Yes. Brent Burns. Well, a lot of guys over 5 minutes actually. At all strengths. So Ferraro, Burns, and Carlson are all burning minutes.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Yes, we can.
All right, let me just send this thing out real quick. Sorry about that. I love it. I plug in my laptop and there's no juice, even though it's plugged in.
So are we just gonna like podcast this game or what?
I mean, I figure we would. Well, let me get this up first. What's going on?
We don't know what's going on.
Yeah. All right, hold on. Facebook's being weird.
Damn you, Facebook! It's too bad. It's too busy radicalizing white people. It's fine.
It radicalizes everyone, man. It doesn't pick and choose. Alrighty. All right. This is 168. That's correct, right?
Correct. Yep.
All right.
The last podcast in which the Sharks are undefeated.
Maybe. Let's see their resiliency. Let's see.
Exactly.
Yes. Let me know when you're recording.
Recording is going.
All right. Here we go. Hello and welcome to Circling the Cup, San Jose Sharks podcast, episode number 168. Some of us are podcasting in the middle of a bomb cyclone, which is the most metal name for a storm ever. So if suddenly one of us disappears, I think you know why. But also, Sharks have been playing some hockey. And, when we did our last pod, we had one game, so small sample size. Now we have a handful of games, still small sample size, but maybe enough of a sample to make some conclusions. I'm Alex. Here with me, as always, is the Honorable Ben. What's up, Ben?
Jasper Weatherby for Calder.
Ha-ha! And, of course, live via the whispering winds of a bomb cyclone from Sweden, even though they're not being affected by it. Colin, what's going on, Colin?
Ooh, it's not often I get to watch a game live, so go Sharks.
I have a drinking game. I have a drinking game going on right now with my friends. Not really, because it's too early in the morning to be drinking, but we are podcasting as the second period of the Boston Sharks game is going on. And the drinking game that I sent to my friends was every time Randy or Brett Hedican make any reference to making sure you have your coffee ready, you drink. And so far, if you were playing that game, you would be hammered, including the Sharks in the first couple of seconds of the game, but we may or may not get to that a little bit later on the podcast. Listen, we've got some more games under our belt. I'll tell you what, guys. Last podcast, again, admitting small sample size, I said I would like to see a little bit more from Carlson and Meyer. And over the course of the last couple of games, I think they listen. I think they listen to the podcast because we got a little bit more from Carlson and Meyer. But before we get to those players in the games, there is one thing that we probably ought to touch on. Probably not for that long because there's only so much we can do about it. But news has come down regarding the Kane suspension, which is at about 21 games, which I think puts him back in the lineup closer to November 20th, assuming that the Sharks, decide to bring him back in. I know look, we haven't dove too deep into the Kane saga just because that was, in the off season, and also because there's kind of, fuck all the Sharks can do about it, to be perfectly blunt. But I mean, do you guys have any thoughts about that situation and what the Sharks are going to do when he is eligible? Because I think the one thing that a lot of fans have picked up on, and the players have not so subtly dropped, is the locker room seemingly is the best it's ever been. Now, that's not to say that that was just Kane in the past, but the Sharks, at least in these early games, do look to have a sense of, coherence and camaraderie that I think we felt was missing the last couple of seasons. And, again, there's multiple players that are no longer with the Sharks. But Kane obviously being a bit of one of the louder ones in that department, especially if you listen to the exit interviews after last season. I don't know. There's not a lot the Sharks can do here, but what are your guys' just top line thoughts on this situation and what the Sharks should do?
I mean, I want out of that contract so bad. The irony is, with the way the team has been playing, even the way the team's playing in Boston right now, if they had Kane at his best, it would be just amazing. But it seems there's enough that comes with even Kane at his best that I don't know. I think leaving him in the press box for the foreseeable future, even if the season is totally on fire, just step away.
I thought it was a little telling that when the news broke, some of the players were asked about whether they had talked to him, and the answer was no. To me was pretty.
I mean, he hasn't talked to his wife in progress of divorce, so why would he talk to his team in progress of divorce?
Yeah, I meant more the outreach from their side either. But yes, fair point.
Here's my kind of feeling on this is that as much as I think we all would like to see Kane and whatever problems he brings to the team go away via the contract being voided, I don't think it's going to happen. And I think I've already sort of shared this. I don't think the team can help themselves, in the sense of if Kane is healthy and Kane is on our cap, he's going to be on the ice, I think. And part of the reason I say that is I don't trust what you hear from locker rooms, negative or positive, right? They don't actually tell you how people are actually feeling at the moment, because they're all cowards and they're all coached to be as boring as possible. So, they don't say anything bad about a player until that player's gone. And when they're saying, oh, everything is great and happy in the locker room, well, yeah, you're winning, or at least you had been winning. So winning is fun. Everybody's happy. In other words, I just don't know how much you can take away from anything we've heard. We don't really have an insider to tell us what's really going on. We don't even really know what Kane is being punished for, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
There are rumors that it was forging a vaccine card, but we don't know. So I suspect that what's going to happen is November 20th, whatever rolls around, and the Sharks just kind of all collectively bite their tongues and go about their business, and Kane is on the ice. That's my suspicion. I don't like it, but I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much they can do, right? I mean, they're not going to get out of that contract at this point. He's borderline untradeable, if not completely untradeable. Yeah. The only reason I say borderline is maybe if you were to eat a massive amount of that salary, there might be someone at this point, or at least mid-season, dumb enough. And again, he has skill. He's a good player. So when I say dumb enough, I mean dumb enough to think that it'll be different this time, because obviously, we felt that way when we acquired him and he started playing well. But as we've seen, this is 3 teams now that he's kind of run into this with. So, and he doesn't really, he outwardly says that, he's working on things, but you also don't get a real sense that that's the case, right? So, you'd have to really be you'd really be rolling the die as a 4th team there, and then you can try to bury him, I guess, but you're still paying him at the end of the day. So it's just kind of a bit of a nightmare. I'm very curious to see one of the things that I'm kind of watching with the Kane situation is actually Eklund to see whether or not the Sharks decide to keep him beyond the 9 games. Because if they don't, um, then I would have to think that that is where Kane would start to fill that. They would look to Kane or someone to fill that void, basically. And again, it's a small sample size for Eklund right now, and he's had some good plays and good games as well. But if a vacancy, quote unquote, opens up, then they need to put someone in there. They do have other options, but again, you've got Kane, who had his best season last season as a Shark, despite the off ice distractions. Well, Kane aside, guys, what have you seen in the last couple of games? Because as of podcasting now, technically this game isn't over against Boston, although it's not looking great. But the Sharks are undefeated. I think they surprised everyone coming out, 4-0 out the gate. Not to say that every game was necessarily convincing all the way through, but boy, I tell you what, there have been some bright spots. For me, I'm loving Dahlin, like absolutely loving Dahlin right now. Again, I asked for Meyer and Carlson to give a little bit more, and I felt like they gave quite a bit more, especially Meyer, who seems to be a man on the mission right now, even if he doesn't always get the actual points to back it. There's just been a lot of really positive stuff to come out as we've seen more and more games. What stuck out to you, Ben?
Well, one of the things I've been trying to think about is whether this team is that much improved over last year or not.
Right.
And this team has won 4 games that it's definitely been a little lucky to win. Particularly, the Sharks have gotten better goalie play. Yeah. I don't feel like they've necessarily fixed everything that ails them on the defensive side of things. They definitely are playing some guys on defense that are suboptimal. I think Carlson has played very well offensively, but he's also been sort of responsible for some bad goals against on his own side. And I think a lot of that is again stuff we have seen. I think until this morning's game, the Sharks have gotten excellent goalie play from both Hill and Reimer. Yeah. And that's been really the big difference, right? In other words, they've been riding to some extent a sort of a hot save percentage. And, that's good. That's better than things have been. I'm not going to be sad about going 4-0 when really it's because your goalies have been better. But it's not sustainable. And that, I think, no shocker, right? This team was never going to go 82-0. That, on a night when the goaltending doesn't show up or those mistakes go in, that they're not going to win. But I agree with you. I think the young guys that we've seen have been largely big improvements, and Dahlin maybe more so than anybody else. But there are other lineup decisions I think this team needs to make to actually be improved in the long run. And I was happy to see Gadjevich and Barabanov draw in, and I think one of the two decisions to pull guys off the ice was good. I don't think Peterson has given us shit, and so that's good. I didn't really mind Eklund getting a night off because he's a really young guy and he's never really played at this level of competition consistently, and probably was a bit tired. And I don't think he was ineffective in the last game he played, but I don't have a problem with that sort of decision where it's let's give a guy a night off and let him see things from the press box, as long as it doesn't become a habit. You know what I mean? Where a guy is bouncing back and forth, and there's clearly something wrong. I don't think Eklund fixes this game. I think that Barabanov should be playing. I think Gadjevich should be playing. I think Eklund should be playing. So I'd like to see a lineup with all those guys in, and with Nieto not necessarily playing. That's what I'd like to see. Yeah. And also my final thought on where we are is the defense at the bottom end is so bad. I don't understand why Vlasic and Shemek are playing together. I don't understand why both of them are on the ice. I think that's an area where the team needs to desperately choose one of those guys and fire them into the sun, because they're bad and they should feel bad. So anyway, that's my sort of take.
I mean, one thing that I will say, and I more or less agree with you. I think I'm still a little bit on the hype train, maybe a hair more. But then that's why we have you on the podcast, Ben. That's why we be on the podcast, well, I suppose.
Oh, in that sense, like the Sharks have won games in which they've been largely outshot. They're not doing a good job of continuing to play their game when they have a lead. They definitely. Hill and Reimer both had been playing out of their minds, right? I don't think this team is that improved yet, but any sign of growth is a good sign.
Yeah,
right. And that's what I'm trying to emphasize. Like in a year like this, where you still haven't made the decisions that would be optimal for your team, going 4-0 is not something to be sad about. It's something to be happy about. The team got a little luck. Great. So I'm not down on this team by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just. They're not optimizing this team. That's my issue.
No, understood. And we've talked about this, right? Luck is a huge part of the game, especially with the amount of parity that's there in the NHL. So if you can start getting, it felt like the last couple of years the puck wasn't bouncing in the Sharks' favor very often. So if we can get some of that, that's great. I agree with you. I think like that you can see sort of a bit of the upward trajectory coming from. The new players, the goaltenders, some of the youth, Cogliano and stuff like that. Like they're definitely pushing in a different direction. The thing that encourages me so far, and again, we're seeing it tested a bit right now as this Bruins Sharks game goes on. And I don't want to sound cliche here because Randy and Curtis and everyone have been talking about it nonstop, but the Sharks of the last 2 years, they just on the eye test lacked a little bit of that resiliency. Like, it seemed like something would occur and then they would just all go off into their own little corners and the game would, go sideways. We talked a lot about how it seemed like the communication would break down, everyone would try to be the hero, and then there would be no team cohesion. And one of the encouraging things that I'm seeing, even in this early juncture where we don't know, you're correct. We don't really know how good these Sharks are quite yet and how big an improvement we're actually seeing because, again, small sample size. I do feel like what we're seeing is a team that's playing together and for each other more. Now, there's still communication mishaps, especially on the defense, a lot on the defense, which still drive me nuts. But overall, if you take a look at like the Toronto game, it felt like the second Toronto would score to get themselves back in, the Sharks would just immediately kind of come back and score. And you get a sense, and again, this has been from an observer standpoint, this has been missing the last 2 years in particular. Yeah. You get a sense that when something goes wrong, they're starting to galvanize together versus all that solo play. And I think if that is really going on, and if that's something that they can maintain, then that is going to help them potentially keep even or punch above their weight on occasion, which is something that they really need. What are you going to say, Colin?
So I like that you brought up the Toronto game because to me, Toronto played like how our boys have been playing these last couple of seasons, where they were just playing way below their skill level on paper, and they were all just sort of in this mess, not really playing together, not really leaning on each other. And then the Sharks are playing with structure, playing with a plan, feeding off each other, setting each other up. And it was really nice to see, especially watching like the Toronto fans after that game, because they're saying all the things that we would say after a Sharks loss.
Well, and actually, the funny part about that is that Toronto Maple Leafs team is the most mentally fragile team I've seen since like the T-Max Sharks, and that helped, right? When you talk about their signs of cohesion and resilience in the Sharks, you look a lot more cohesive and resilient when you're playing against a team that falls apart at the earliest sign of adversity, like Toronto is right now, both their fans and their player base. So, I think the issue is here. I agree with you in a lot of ways, but I think a big part of it was that if you can't count on your goalie to ever make a save, that's like when a team just has no recourse. There's nothing they can do, and I think that's been the big difference this year that allows this team to feel more resilient than it is you're not giving up a goal on every breakaway like you were with Jones in net, right? And that's huge for the guys. Like if they can't count on that guy to make a glove save. Like Hill made a glove save, I think at the end. I think it was the TML game that absolutely Jones gives up. Absolutely, that is a goal.
Wait, so are you saying that all of our problems with breaking our defensive end, all those passes where it's just the defender throwing it down ice as hard as he could, was just because our team was scared to have the puck anywhere near Jones?
I mean, I still see this team launch pucks down. Well, let's be honest. I still see Burns launch pucks down the ice out of desperation. I'm not sure that was tied to Jones. It's more that like how confident or resilient can you be when you know one mistake is in the back of your net, no matter what?
Yeah, right. It feels at that point, it feels like you're walking on eggshells, and you cannot play your game, especially not offense, if you feel like you're walking on eggshells the entire time. If you feel like one fumble of the puck is an instant goal, it takes away so much of what you're going to be able to do. Your confidence level, it's just demoralizing. You know what I mean? And look, it's not like the goalie's trying to do that or demoralize the team, but like, I totally agree with you, Ben. I think it's been a huge difference. The Sharks have at least the first two pairings on and off have made some pretty good defensive plays in certain situations, which is also I think encouraging. I agree with you about the sort of the Vlasic Shemek situation. Or at least those two should not be together at all. But it it is nice to see. So Hill was a bit of a gamble here, right? Like there were a lot of people who believed that he just wasn't getting enough starts, but the skill was already there. Reimer is kind of nice because he's a known. And yes, things can change as you move teams and situations, and you can have a good season and a bad season. But he's a known entity. So what the Sharks have right now, with Hill, seemingly stepping up quite a bit, and even lessening rebounds in some instances, is now the Sharks know that they can play a more offensive game and not be punished if the puck happens to dribble through the neutral zone and towards their goaltender. And that is a really big deal. You also see guys like Ferraro, though. I don't want to, not give him a shout because, in some respects, I feel like much of the defense has been better. Now, there are still those risky passes, as you guys brought up. And a lot of that, I think a lot of that comes from, look, you got Carlson and you got Burns. And those are virtually forwards to a large extent. So you're not going to not have that, but to know that Hill will be there is good. And also, to be honest, I feel like the Sharks have done a better job of covering for each other. I don't think it's exactly where it needs to be, and I don't think the communication is exactly where it needs to be. But in the past, it was like you'd have frickin' Marlowe as the last guy back, scrambling to be the last guy back, and it was just bizarre. Whereas here, I feel like when they activate Burns or Carlson, it seems like there's someone who's sliding. It just seems like they're a little bit more coherent when it comes to
I think team speed helps.
Wait.
Yes, right?
Hugely.
Sorry, Colin, go ahead.
Exactly. Well, no, exactly. To your point, Marlowe wasn't the first team back. He was the last person forward. So, speed absolutely helps. And to your point about having the backstop be reliable, well, we're seeing LeBanc back check now this season. And it's great. Yeah. And maybe he's back checking because he's like, oh, there's actually going to be a rebound or a save I can, follow up on.
I mean, every guy has to at some point, every good NHL player at some point has to become a two-way player because offense is created off of, defensive breakups and stuff just as much as it is by, driving the ice and passing to an open guy on the other side, But more than that, like I also want to note, we were talking about the defense itself. I want to just give a shout out to Jake Middleton. I hear he doesn't like being called Jacob, who has looked shockingly competent this year.
Yeah,
and I've been very happy with his play. And I hope that when one of the other guys the Sharks believe are NHL quality defenders gets healthy, Shemek is the guy who sits over Middleton.
Yeah, you know what?
And Weatherby are like surprise breakouts this season for me.
Well, Middleton was sort of sneakily pulling some points in, and it's one of those. He's one of those guys that, if not for the stash and the occasional, I'm going to be the one who fights attitude,
Yeah.
you might overlook them. Hey, listen, we got some games. Why don't we dive into these a little bit? So the Sharks
Yep.
started our week with a game in Montreal against the Canadiens, and they won this one 5-0. Goals from Jonathan Dahlen, 2 goals in the first period, and pretty early on as well. In fact, it looked like he was angling for a hat trick. And boy, for all of us who were around when his dad Ulf was around, woo, felt kind of nice to see a Dahlen doing some nice work in a Sharks sweater. And then Carlson also in the first period. And then in the second period, we saw Timo Meier. In the third period, Kevin LeBanc. One of the things that really stuck out to me and was a very big difference maker in this game was the face-off percentage. The Sharks were really solid on the face-off this game. I think they were about 62%, and the Canadiens 38%. But overall, I mean, it felt like coming off that first game where we were excited, this game, Sharks got a fast start. Not something we're used to. we're sort of used to days like today where the Sharks could use a little coffee, anyone drinking.
Stop it.
Colin, what did you think about this game?
I felt bad for Montreal. I mean, it was great to watch. It was, you mentioned the faceoffs. I love that we're doing something with our possession, and it seems like the whole team is on the same page. So, when we win a faceoff, we're actually moving as a unit and setting up shots and rebounds. I'm not so hyped off the Dahlen thing. Like, I don't like him on the top line, to be honest, but I like him in the lineup. Yeah, I love the win. I felt bad for Montreal, and it was nice to see that it was a win that resembled the previous game.
What don't you like about Dahlen? I'm not saying you hate Dahlen. Just out of curiosity.
He feels like the perfect third line winger to me. Like, it's just him on the top line. I feel is like, yeah, somebody can probably do that better, but he's had success, so good for him.
I mean, the thing is, to that point, you're probably right. If this team had more, talent and sort of veteran, more of these guys were vets, I think he would be a third line winger. But when you're developing a young guy, I don't think there's any hazard with giving them first line opportunities to build some confidence, right? Like, I don't disagree with you that I think ideally Dahlen isn't a top liner, but at the same time, like, you want him to have some success because confidence is such a big part of, NHL players getting comfortable and learning how to play their game and stuff like that, right? So I think it makes total sense to give. I've said this for years. The Sharks power play units should be nothing but young guys, because you want them to be getting points and scoring and getting confidence and playing their game. And, that's also a situation in which you can afford to have a few defensive lapses since you've got an extra guy back, in theory, right? You're 5-on-4, so as long as your defenseman doesn't completely fucking play up, you're in okay shape, right?
I can tell you what I like about him. I can tell you what I really like about Dahlen. He follows Couture around like a puppy and just sort of goes wherever he thinks Couture wants him to be.
Isn't that what you? Isn't that what you want out of a winger?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's funny because we finally found somebody who pays as much attention to Couture as Couture does.
I think this idea of lines in the NHL needs to be antiquated. I mean, yes, you obviously have to have lines. I get it, but at the same time, what a first line is and what a second line is, I don't think matters. You need to have 4 completely competent lines going through. And I, for me, what's the most important is look at practices. Who are these players having the most success and confidence and chemistry with? And, it's something that obviously not getting to see practices, we don't get to see as much. But look, as someone who's played sports, I'm sure many of you who played sports, sometimes there's just people you pair with and things work out really well. And that's great. And so for me, it's like, I don't care if you're on the fourth line. I don't even care that the fourth line's called the fourth line. There might be a game situation where it makes more sense for me as a coach to roll that line out for more minutes. You know what I mean? It all depends on the matchup, and it all depends on how those players are working together. And so for me, what I like about Dahlen on that first line is I feel like, first of all, he obviously brings speed, which the Sharks really, really, really need. But also, he's he's in the right place at the right time for a lot of what like that line needs. And so even if he doesn't always put it in, and let's not minimize the fact that he's put quite a few in considering the number of games in his situation. I think he fits fine there, and I think you could probably move him around. But again, I think whether or not he's on the first line or the third line, it comes down to who seems to be linking up really well at practice.
I mean, to your point, Alex, you really shouldn't call a line first, second, third, or fourth, right? What you should have is you've got your offensive zone specialists, you've got your defensive zone specialists, and then you've got, guys that can do either, right?
Yeah.
Like if you desperately need to get the puck, get a face-off, and then get out of the zone, you can build a line around that. Because that's a situation you're going to face, right? You're going to face defensive zone face-offs. If you're a coach in the NHL, that's what you should be building towards. If you've got a line that puts maximal pressure on the other team by winning an offensive zone face-off, or at least collecting the results of an offensive zone face-off and maintaining your zone presence and getting shots on the net, that's a thing you can design around, right?
Yeah.
Like that, you're absolutely right. But the way it's natural to look at that is that line that you put in the offensive zone is your top line, and that line you put in the defensive zone is your fourth line, right? Yeah, and then everything else is just something in between.
Well, no, I don't. You be careful. You're getting dangerously close to flirting with the idea of a checking line over there, Ben.
I did not mention a checking line.
I know. I noticed that.
Energy line.
No,
look,
line. I get it. I mean, that is the way that lines used to be built, right? It was very much akin to those of us who have been in orchestras or band, where you have your first chair. Your first chair is typically your best person at that instrument, and I get it. But again, here it's sort of like if you're running. We saw this the last couple of years, right? Especially with the Boar, where like if you're running one line into the ground, you're wasting three other lines, and so. Again, for me, it's less about what line you're on. It's more about what the makeup of that line is and the situation you're rolling that line out. And I think so far, this is one of those areas that I've started to feel a little bit more comfortable with this roster, because I felt like, a couple of players like Burns, for example, has had some minute creep going on, but it's been a bit more balanced than in years past, where you would have like, Hertl would be playing like half the game, 2/3 of the game, or you'd have a defensive pairing that was playing the entire game,
right?
And running guys out.
Well, that was happening when the Sharks hit adversity, right? Yes. So it was when Bob Bogner or DeBoer felt their job was starting to get on the line, is when you saw them lean on particular players. So I would not yet say that we are not going to see that, right? Because the Sharks were 4-0 going into this game. It's very easy for a mediocre coach like Bob Bogner to fall into a bad habit at a moment's notice. So
yes, but
won't this game expose that?
Well, hold on, but
maybe
equally so though, Ben. To be fair, equally so. Sharks of old would have done that just based off of the age of the line,
right?
To an extent.
Right.
So, like, if they had young kids on that third line was probably not getting minutes. And so at least now it seems like they've gotten around the ageism just a hair. And I think that's a very big step for a team that is trying to rebuild on the fly. You can't rebuild on the fly if you're not spreading out that experience, to your point earlier. Sorry, Colin, I didn't mean to speak over you.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought watching the game.
All right, well, unless there's any other thoughts on this Montreal game, let's head over to the first of the back-to-back now.
Sorry, I did have a thought. Sorry, one last thing, which was that I've talked a little bit about how the Sharks don't really have a very good strategy for holding a lead. Hill did end up with the shutout here because he played out of his goddamn mind. This team very much tried to let Montreal have themselves a goal or two. I just wanted to recognize that this game, Hill was pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a little bit of a trend that you're going to see across the games that happened last week, where it was good and encouraging to see the offense score, because obviously we need the offense to score. We coming from several years back, we had that team where it just seemed like the Sharks would just outscore everyone, not necessarily play defense. But here, getting the goaltenders back is big. And that next game against the Senators was a bit of a test for that. Not that the Senators are necessarily the greatest team in the world, although they are 2-2-0 at least as of right now. But that was Reimer's first game, and he did a stand-up job with a .968 save percentage. The Sharks would go on to win this game at a score of 2-1. They wouldn't score the first goal. That would be the Senators in the first period. But in the second period, we would see Logan Couture and Kevin Labanc score. And Kevin Labanc, that shot, nice.
Yeah, that was nice. I didn't like this game. Like this game was oddly tough, and I guess Ottawa's trying to build this like tough team image, but no, it came out a little scrappy, and I liked that we didn't play into it too much, but I felt like we got off our game a bit trying to step up to the physicality instead of playing structure and shooting.
I mean, I think I think my favorite thing about the Ottawa game was Josh Norris talking shit about the Karlsson trade before it. I don't know if you guys saw that, but he was like, I guess they they got Karlsson and then didn't get the Stanley Cup out of it. So I'm kind of happy here myself. It's like, Josh, why you got to do a team like that?
It's ouch. Well, they would carry this game over because they would play a back-to-back against the Maple Leafs. Now, this game to me was a bit less encouraging for multiple reasons, but Sharks do eke out a win here, and there were a lot of goals in a short amount of time. And no goals in the first, and in the second period, about 2:31 in, Logan Couture scores, and then Spezza immediately scores for Toronto, and then Timo Meier goes and scores. So you get a clump of 3 goals in like a minute, I think a minute and 3 seconds or something like that, if I can do the math quickly in my head. And then saw a little bit similar later in the second period where Toronto would score, and then Erik Karlsson would come back and score. And then the Sharks would start the third period real nice and quick with Jonathan Dahlen. And again, it's fairly encouraging to me to see the Sharks scoring early in periods versus letting the other team rack up 2 or 3 and then deciding to show up. But then Tavares would score, and then Logan Couture would score. Now, I got to be honest with you about this game. Logan Couture and his line really held this game together.
Yep.
Like that was a Herculean effort from those guys, and especially Logan Couture, who takes a high stick to the face, right, as if he needs to knock out any more teeth, and then almost immediately afterwards, Burns just does his thing of blindly ripping a slapper in the vicinity of the goalie, and boy, Couture just gets sniped in the chest. And I was like, come on, man. That guy's done so much for you this game. Leave Couture alone. But I'll tell you what, like I was saying earlier, one of the things that I thought was really great about this game was that resiliency. So, almost right away when Toronto scored, the Sharks would come back and score very quickly. And you could see that those fast scores really frustrated the Leafs, and especially Matthews, who towards the end of the game tried his damn best to get around Hill and just couldn't do it. What did you guys see?
Toronto collapsing. Like it was a very familiar sight, and it was nice to be on the other side of it for once. To be the team that held its structure and saw the players leaning on each other and keeping to the play, like Weatherby and on the other net front presence, knowing like how to shift and how to screen, and Toronto just falling apart. And go Sharks! I'm glad to take it, and honestly, it was nice to beat Toronto because again, watching their fan reactions is so delicious.
I mean, here's the thing with Toronto, and I was going to actually comment on it earlier because I think Ben, you touched upon the team breaking down. The thing with Toronto, and this has been going on for quite a while, at least for as long as they've been good again, quote unquote, is they are consistently a team of really good players, but not always the most coherent of teams. And the fans, who are very loud and dedicated and obnoxious,
oversensitive,
I think everyone will always be traded because hometown discount or whatever it is they want to believe. I mean, I'm not shocked that the Leafs would sort of break apart into that sort of individual effort that we were talking about the Sharks previously doing, because that's been the makeup of their teams for quite a while. My 2 cents on Toronto.
They're just they don't they're a team where the coaches don't have the answers, and so they are very, very mentally fragile.
And
they
got good players.
That said, the Sharks were lucky to win that game because they were outplayed. They were outshot. They sort of won the high danger chance battle, so that was good. The Sharks did barely.
Yep.
But I think they largely were outskilled and outplayed, and Aiden Hill kept them in that game. There were a lot of scrambles in the net front that Hill was able to fight off that I'm not confident Jones would have. And then there was a shot that could have tied the game up that Hill snatched with his glove hand that I'm 100% sure Jones doesn't get.
Yeah, that's semi-split save, right?
Yeah. And so, and that's what I'm saying. You have to, if you get those plays from your goalie, and you're going to win some games where you're outplayed. I think that's largely where this team has been so bad over the last couple of years. Is they could not pull themselves out of a game in which they got outplayed prior to this, right? And when you go on a 5-game road trip to open up the season, you're gonna have problems winning games. It's hard to win on the road. So
back to back
and back to backs, yeah. And so again, like I'm not like hyped up over where this team is right now because there are things that need to be fixed, and I'm not 100% sure this coaching staff is equipped to fix them.
Well, I still want a team with good draft position at the end of the day.
I don't know that you're going to get that out of this, Colin. I think again we're in a place where I think this team is just good enough to fuck themselves on draft position, and and it depends on what they do with Eklund to some extent. So it's going to really bear watching over the next 5 games he plays. How he responds to being in the press box tonight.
I don't want to play for a draft. I'm tired of the Sharks sucking. I don't.
Well,
I don't want it.
They're not built to play for the draft. You don't bring in a Bonino and a Cogliano to not be trying to snake your way into the playoffs and get hot goaltending into the second or third round, right? That's I think what the Sharks' plan essentially is look. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say look. I know it's still early, and I know I'm forever the optimist on this stuff, at least until we get halfway through the season, and then I'm crapping all over the team. But I believe, maybe falsely, because it is a small sample size, I believe that some of the youth that we have right now on this roster, that includes Hill, that includes Dahlin, that includes Weatherby, that includes Eklund, we weren't in a position before where we had youth that was necessarily ready to come up. And I think we have some of that now. And so for me, it's less about needing to stock up on as many, number ones or, I don't want to be in Edmonton and just blow every single number one you get your hands on. But it's not about that at this point. Now it's about getting those guys that we have that we feel like are capable and close as much experience as we can, because I don't think personally we need 50 other pieces. I mean, you got to remember that, yes, we do have some anchor contracts for sure. We also have some contracts that are going to come off the books, whether we want them to, whether we want them to, other people, or Hurdle, not. But I don't feel the need to do that, and it's not entertaining hockey for me, and I don't mind it for a bit. I'll give you a season or 2 of it, but by 3 seasons or 4 seasons, if I don't feel like the team's capable of turning around, I'm not gonna. I don't want to sit around and wait another 3 or 4 years for those picks to accumulate. And again, I don't feel like we necessarily need to. I think
also to that point, we get 2 years of semi-cap relief off of Jones's buyout, and then the escalators kick in for the next few years. So this is, I think the Sharks by cutting Jones, by waiving him and buying him out, and then bringing in Cogliano Bonino, signaled that their intent is to try to do something in these 2 years. It's a rebuild on the fly, which is what Doug Wilson has been saying forever. I think the issue has been that the last year, the kids that they had,
And make no mistake, like the kids we have up now are not really the same kids that you were looking at last year, not to the same extent. The kids weren't ready, and the coaching staff wasn't ready, and you had COVID and all the other weirdness that was going on at the same time. I think now where we're at is now, like, look, you can see what the future is, and some of them are playing on the ice now. Like, there's very little doubt in my mind that Dahlin is going to continue to be a piece for us in the future. There's very little doubt in my mind that even in this small sample size, that Weatherby has the right skill set to continue to move forward and blossom. And there's other players, like Eklund, who, regardless of whether they keep him up or send him down, he's going to be back next year and probably even more ready to play. So I'm already starting to see those pieces. And for me, if you're sitting there and you're really playing for that draft pick, it's because you don't see those pieces, or they're too far off. And I just don't feel like the Sharks are in that position anymore, which, credit to Doug Wilson and some, whatever God he prays to. But, some of that, I think if you were to ask us last year, we would have said, this franchise is in deep trouble. And then they got Eklund, and that helped a little bit. But some of these smaller moves that he made, the Cogliano pickup, the Bonino, the Hill, those combined with where some of these kids have popped up, has just, it looks like he's slowly starting to do it again, so to speak, in a positive way. But that's just my 2 cents. If the Sharks were, if I see the Sharks start to play for a draft pick, which I don't really believe the players actively do personally, I'll be really pissed off. I'll be really upset. That's where I am. And rant.
Boy.
I mean, I think you make it a good point to build on here, which is that what Doug Wilson did do this summer is worth recognizing, that he could have just, again, stood pat with Martin Jones. He could have not tried to bring in guys to solidify, sort of the bottom 6 center depth. And, typically I would have preferred, in the past I would have preferred some of the younger guys get those chances instead. But again, as I've said, I think it's better to let those guys play on the wings of folks who are good NHL players. And Cogliano and Bonino are not nothing, right? Where I've been upset in the past is where he's brought back 90-year-old Patrick Marleau to try to be that guy who's clearly, stick a fork in him Dunzo. So I don't have an issue with it being relatively cheap deals for Cogliano and Bonino at all, because at least those guys can play. And it gives guys a chance to develop on the wing before they're asked to play center. I have no problem with that. And I think Wilson deserves some credit for, making this potentially a more resilient team through those guys.
I don't have, and I've never had, really, just overall bigger picture. I've never had an issue with Wilson in with respects to me feeling like he doesn't understand what the team needs. Now, whether or not he's always gotten the correct piece, obviously a trade deadline will usually get a throwaway player, Ben Smith, who you're just sort of like, okay, that's a guy. Where I feel like Doug Wilson is consistently let down is his choice in coaches.
Yes.
That's where I feel like the struggles the most, because I think even when you look at the bad years that we've had, you look at those rosters, and are there some problems? Sure. Any team. Are there some bad contracts? Yeah, sure. And look, I know that there's a lot of bad contracts right now for the Sharks, and I understand. I also, like I keep saying every season, think that those guys are better than they've been coached to play, and that's where that's where you really feel the pain, especially in these early years or mid years of those long contracts, is you're not getting those 2 or 3 or 4 years that you thought you were going to get that would be, make up for the back end. But, I think he understands. He hasn't always put himself in the best position. I get that. And that's a fair criticism of him. I mean, you can look at the situation and go, well, right now the Sharks cap struggles and the difficulties of pulling in players is of his own creation, and that's completely fair. I would also, though, say that, I'm not a big advocate of long contracts. I'm not an advocate of max contracts. I never have been. But a lot of the moves that Doug Wilson gets criticized for are moves that, at the time, are not necessarily as bad as they are in hindsight. Again, you look at the Carlson trade that a lot of people were pissed off about. You make that trade every time that pops up, unless you have the benefit of hindsight. And you look at the re-signing. That's a trade. Honestly, he was going to get that money elsewhere easily. Now, you can argue maybe the Sharks shouldn't have been the one to give it to him. Fine. Also a bit of hindsight. I mean, he was obviously injured a bit, and that's where the caution would be. But he makes a lot of good moves. And I think he understands where he needs to be. It's just a question of whether or not he can find the right staff, I think, to get him there. And I think one of the things that really lets him down, and this is, I think, one of the Sharks' biggest problems, is I think the Sharks' unwillingness to look outside of their own franchise is part of the problem. That's where I think they keep kind of screwing up. You know, you see it with Bugner. I don't hate Bugner or anything, but like I think fresh eyes would be really beneficial. But instead, the Sharks continue to just pull from the same people internally. And I think it's because they feel that those coaches already know the players really well. And, you know, you see this happening in other sports right now. The U.S. men's national team sort of has the same issue where they've got really good players. Their coaching staff comes from inside the organization when the kids were young, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's what the team needs at this point in time. So,
yeah,
another rant. Sorry.
I mean, existing coaches have their biases and preconceptions, and
absolutely.
And when they're not willing to challenge those biases and preconceptions, guys get lost. Guys who could make an impact get lost, and and guys who are making a negative impact have that negative impact get ignored because in their minds the coaches think that player is still the player they were 3 or 4 years ago, or that player has earned, you know, the right to play through bad games, or that guy's really good, you know, as on the ice during practices. So, you know, the guy does everything we ask him to. Well, yeah, except, you know, score or be actually good at playing hockey. That's
you're not necessarily challenging those players in a way that a new coach would challenge those players.
Yeah.
Right, because when a new coach comes in, you have to earn that. They don't know anything about you. They don't care, and like that's why every time the Sharks make an internal appointment, I cringe a little bit. Not because those are necessarily bad coaches, but just because I feel like it's getting stale. You know what I mean? Like this is stale eyes that we've been seeing the last couple of seasons, and that's where I think Doug Wilson really has the issues. I feel less like he's one of the more calm GMs. I mean, we could have a GM that just makes every move's a stupid move or panics, and that's honestly most of the GMs in the NHL.
Yep.
All right. Well, any other games on that Toronto game, or any other thoughts, I should say?
I was going to let Colin talk.
Yeah, sorry, Colin.
Well, we've got the game that's happening right now, but I mean, I think until this team figures out how to get a bottom defensive pair that is reliable, or dare I say a shutdown pair, it's not any sort of cup run ready. Like it's maybe second period unless some crazy Cinderella story happens. And you know, I'd like to see the team get fixed. And maybe it is one more offseason, but they still have to figure out how to create the space to get somebody or some bodies in to be defensively reliable for this team.
Listen, as long as they keep giving kids the minutes, and that's something that I think is encouraging right now this season compared to last season. I think we're in a good spot, even in regards to the defense, which they haven't done that on the defense yet. Hopefully they wake up and do it. Sorry, Alex Rant podcast. Go ahead, Colin.
Well, but who do we have on defense? We've got Knizhov or
it's basically it's Hadaka, Merkley,
Hadaka, Vaseline.
Those are the guys that are probably the next to take a step up. But
yeah, and I don't get why we haven't seen Hadaka yet. I mean,
I don't get it either.
It's probably just because this is a road game with quite a few games in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
But that frustrates me quite a bit, especially with that third pairing. Like I just feel like it doesn't make sense to keep rolling out that third pairing.
Yeah. I think they're waiting for Knizhov to get healthy. I think they think Knizhov is the answer. And so they're letting Hadaka get some games in at the AHL level. I don't agree with it, but I think that's their perspective.
Yeah, I don't love waiting. I'm not a patient man.
Yeah.
Hence me not wanting to tank for a draft pick over there.
Well, we'll see, because come deadline, it might hurdle a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't disagree, and I think that's going to be, if they lose Hurdle, I think that takes a chunk out of that potential future there. So they got to work it out. Listen, we've got games going on. So we got one going on right now. It is against the Boston Bruins. As of this podcast, the third is just starting. It is 4-1. We will probably talk about this game next week because it is not looking as good. Speaking of trends and trying to figure out where the Sharks are, we should probably have more data to go off of next week, starting with this game. But the Sharks are still on the road. On Tuesday, they take on the Nashville Predators. Then they're home, playing Montreal on Thursday and Winnipeg on Saturday. And if you're wondering, hey, where's the Pacific Division? Don't worry about it. You're not going to see them for a while anyway. As of this podcast, again, as that Boston game is going on, the Sharks are sitting at second place in the Pacific. Edmonton is above them, having played one more game and undefeated. And boy, McDavid and those guys are starting to look good, which is bad timing for us. Just below the Sharks, down by a point, but up 2 games, is the Vancouver Canucks. We're sitting there at 7 points. And then a little bit of a ways down with less games is Calgary at 5, Anaheim with 6 games at 5. And then, who cares? I think one of the best parts about this season so far was after the Montreal game, or Toronto game, seeing the Sharks at the top of the NHL standings and our good friend Vegas, at least at the bottom of the Pacific Division, where they still are right now. Woohoo!
And Mark Stone on IR.
Yeah. And Seattle, also our new team in the division, sitting at 7, so also not faring much better. Listen, that concludes. 3 stars. Guys, we didn't do 3 stars. Holy smokes, Colin.
God damn it. We almost made it, Colin.
It's going to be Couture at first, Hurdle at second, and I guess Dahlin at third.
Okay. Fair. No explanation, just that's what it is.
Well, I think third could go to a bunch of guys because the team has been scoring as a team. So, LeBanc doesn't get his roofer if Weatherby isn't screening. Dahlin doesn't get anything that Couture's not serving up. It's fine. Third star can go to the team because they've been scoring as a group, and it's really, really nice to see after years of a bunch of individuals just trying to piece something together within 5 feet of ice instead of the team playing the full 200.
I have to be honest with you, Colin. We've violated the rule of choosing a star player or thing. I think that's the first time anyone's given it to the entire team and just said F it. usually it's like, I'll combine Dahlin and Eklund or whatever, and you're like, you know what? The San Jose Sharks, third star.
Colin has achieved the dream, my dream, of just essentially subtly telling Alex to go fuck his 3 stars.
Oh, come on now. Speaking of 3 stars, Ben, what are your thoughts on the 3 stars?
So I am going to give Timo Meier my first star just because he's been just very consistent and played very well over the opening 4 games. This game is obviously still in progress, and I don't think the top line or that line has played as well tonight, but whatever, he's great. And I, everybody has been so down on him that I like seeing him.
Yeah.
And as I said that, I think he just got his pocket picked in the defensive zone. So I lied. Actually, Timo Meier. No, I'm just kidding. So first star, Timo Meier. Second star, I'm going to give to Hurdle because Hurdle is bar none the best forward on this team. And I hope the Sharks can get something done that keeps him here. And for third star, I'm going to give it to Dahlin, who's been the most productive of the rookies so far. So that's my honorable mention to Carlson for some great offensive play.
Yeah, and that's not too far from mine. I mean, I could go the way that our friend Colin went and just hit a team. I'm going to say, and I think there are a lot of players, even some that necessarily haven't been putting up as many points as others, who I think have done a good job. I think Couture had a very good week. I think Carlson had a pretty good week. I'm going to go ahead and give my first star to Timo Meyer. I think for the exact same reason as you, Ben, and especially since I was the one last podcast that was like, I want to see more, and I think he stepped up really big this week, which is great.
LeBank's been great too. I want to note.
Yeah. My second star, Dahlin, for obvious reasons. I think we've already covered it on this week's podcast. And I'm going to give my third star to Aiden Hill, who I know right now in this game might not be having the most joyful of occasions. But again, I don't think it can be understated how important having good net minding has been. And I know that one of those games, Reimer was there too. That's fair. But I think, again, I already had expectations on what Reimer would be, and so far in the one game, that's been about it. Hill, for me, was the big fingers crossed question mark, and I think so far what we're seeing is better, and better enough to, as Ben adequately put it, or eloquently put it, good enough to get the rest of the team not so damn focused on all the goals they're going to give up, which allows them to do their job. So that's awesome. Hey, listen. That concludes another Weeks of Sharks podcast from us. You can subscribe to us on the iTunes podcast app. You can give us a review if you'd like to. Someone gave us a 1-star. That's cool. I don't know why you would listen to the podcast, but go you. Appreciate it. You can also check us out on Spotify. Android people, I mean, it's been 7 years, and I haven't once told you where to go, so just get used to it. You can check us, Ben, out on Twitter at Circling the Cup. You can check us out at Facebook at facebook.com/Circling the Cup, where we mostly just post links to the live streams. But again, ask us a question anywhere. We will answer it. And of course, you can check us out on the web at circlingthecup.com, which is where we basically dump the RSS feed of these podcasts. Well, gents, hopefully the Sharks can show some resiliency in this third period and come back against the Bruins. I don't think we're holding our breath based on the way this game has gone. But that concludes the week. Say bye-bye.
Go Sharks.
Undefeated for another 16 minutes.
Woo! Bye-bye. Well, that was fun. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And yes, we did see you. And yes, we agree with a lot of that stuff in there. We much appreciate it. We always appreciate people listening and writing. Cool. Well, I'm going to try to not have my house flood.
Yes, or blow away.
Yeah. I'm not so lately concerned about that. Yeah. But I will talk to you guys later before the power cuts out.
Yeah, I got to go get cleaned up. So good stuff, guys. Thanks for the
Be safe. Have fun.
The podcast. Go Sharks.
Yeah, always.